Welcome back to another episode of Rewired Sober. I'm your host, Kate Vitala. This is a solo episode. I wanted to talk about something, and I'm going to do my very, very best to make this cohesive, but it might be a rant. In recovery meetings, I am often known for, quote, Kate rants. So it might be easier to watch this on YouTube so you can see me emoting, but I am known to get a little bit colorful and spicy and just start ranting about topics. However, no one would listen to my podcast if that's all I did. So I'm going to try to make this somewhat linear. And so before I release next week's interview with filmmaker Carrie Lynn Miller and her upcoming film Talks, I realized I had more that I wanted to talk about on this topic and other pieces of my story I wanted to share and kind of go in a deeper dive. So I will release that episode next. And this is kind of the prequel, but you don't want to miss the next episode because the Talks film is and that is TOX, like Botox. The Talks film is coming out soon, and I believe every woman in the world should watch this. Okay, going back to why these ideas started forming in my head is, and I'm going to say this, you're going to hate me because I always talk about New York, but it's the only place I travel. And I guess lately I'm on a nurse's salary. I can afford a couple trips a year. And if I want to see the whole world in one place, New York is that place for me. So sorry about all the New York stories, but no, I'm not sorry because I just love New York. But something interesting happened to me this last trip, and I came home and told my husband about it. And that's when these ideas started circulating in my head. And no, I promise you, this isn't one of those like gross, barfy, magical, I found myself wandering the streets in Soho, very eat, pray, love-ish. It's not that. It was simpler than that. And it came down to, I spent over a week looking at people in real life, faces, thousands of faces all over the city, in Central Park, in Tribeca, at coffee shops, restaurants, at the Maze, the non-alcoholic social club I went to, walking through vintage shops, like standing on street corners, eating, smoking, running around the city, laughing, all the things, existing as humans. And somewhere around like day 2 or 3 of this, I realized something that it genuinely surprised me. Nobody looked like Instagram. And I know this intellectually. I know this. We know this. Nobody looks like AI. Nobody looks like a filter or a TikTok reel. But suddenly it hit me that I hadn't been exposed to that many faces in real life and in a really long time. Short of, working at an espresso stand, I'm not sure many of us see a variety of faces on the regular. I work outside the home as well as coach individuals online, and I happen to see roughly the same faces over and over and over again, even on Zoom and through social media, because, the algorithm and what pops up for us. And the faces I see in real life, the number gets even smaller. I see a few nurses at work. I see the clients. I see a few doctors. I see my husband, my family, but I don't actually wander through the crowds and look at faces. And before you tell me like, okay, New York is full of beautiful people. Yes. And that's exactly what made it even more interesting. Because yes, I believe all the women are beautiful. There were beautiful people, but they weren't perfect. Nobody was. They had wrinkles, pores, gray hairs, wrinkly clothes, expressions, faces, crooked teeth, dandruff, faces that actually moved, right? And personas and faces that looked real and looked alive. And I realized that after a really long time, months and months of staring at Zoom screens, editing podcast videos, recording myself, creating clips, and spending more and more time looking at my own fucking face, looking at my own face more than any individual should spend looking at their own face, it felt weirdly comforting. And I came home, I jokingly told my husband, "I'm not as ugly as I thought," you know, because I think I forgot what real humans actually look like. When I was in the city, I attended a networking event at random for professionals in the health and beauty industry where I talked about sobriety coaching and being a nurse coach. And there were people from all walks, regular people that showed up to this event. And it was really striking to me that I felt like I had forgot what real humans looked like. And again, I work outside the home. I'm not someone who lives on Zoom. I see faces. But I didn't think that this realization was a small thing because I think it's become a bigger psychological thing, maybe even a recovery thing, certainly a humaning thing, a humanity thing. And so there's been something that's been rattling around in my brain. So for most of human history, people barely saw themselves. Well, if you go way, way, way back, right? Like if we're talking like caveman days, you see your reflection in the water. And then as time went on, we maybe had a few mirrors if we're lucky, but we fast forward to today. I can literally inspect my pores in high def. I can like zoom in on every picture on my forehead, on my jowls, my jawline. I can look at my neck, my teeth. I can record myself and watch it back and critique myself and then compare to thousands of other people doing the exact same thing. And our brains were never actually designed for this. And psychologists actually have a term for the phenomenon that happens next, and it's called self-objectification, which really is just like when you stop experiencing yourself as a person and you start evaluating yourself as an object. Like you stop asking yourself, how do I feel in this moment? Or what am I thinking about? Or what do I need? Right? I always tell clients when they're having a craving, ask yourself what you need. What do I really want? And you start asking internally, you're asking the question, how do I look to others? How am I coming across? How am I presenting? Right? Do I look old, tired, fat? Am I attractive? Am I enough? And psychologists actually describe this as internalizing almost like another observer's perspective of yourself. So you become like the main character, but also the audience. And I'm making this hand gesture of like a bubble. It's like what I see for myself is I'm trying to live my life while simultaneously watching it and judging it. Like you go to an event, a social event or a party, and a regular, healthy, like human experience would be, oh, I'm really enjoying this conversation or I'm having fun, right? These people might be cool, interesting, funny. But in the world of self-objectification, that might internally sound like, oh, well, can they see all my neck jowls? Is my makeup too thick? Is it too heavy? Is it greasy? Am I talking too much? Am I sticking my gut out when I stand like this? Right? Did you guys just smell my fart? And so I'm like monitoring myself. And it's exhausting. And I think women I think women have been dealing with this forever. But of course, social media pours gasoline on it because we have the unlimited selfies and the filters and the beauty apps. And we had Facetune long before AI regenerated images became a thing. And just this constant visual feedback, although maybe Facetune is AI. But, then the pandemic happened and then we went into Zoom. Now, I want to talk about Zoom for a second because I love it and I see my clients on Zoom, but Zoom did a number on all of us. There's actual research called Zoom dysmorphia. Plastic surgeons started reporting an increase in cosmetic consultations during and after the pandemic because people were starting to stare at themselves on a webcam all day long. And a webcam will distort facial proportions depending on, what type you have, the lens, the distance. And so your face can appear like wider. Your features can be kind of altered. And you can also put a filter over Zoom. I remember having a Zoom conversation with a friend of mine who's close to her 60s. And I said, "How do you look younger than me? I'm 47." She said, "Oh, it's a Zoom filter." I had no idea. Right. And also the image I'm staring at back on Zoom is distorted. My nose looks weird, the side profile. And so you think about this alteration in our features and people staring at ourselves all day, and we're literally going to a cosmetic surgeon based on a distorted image, saying, "I really need to fix this." Right? I mean, it's like, imagine spending out 8 hours a day, like, looking into one of those carnival mirrors. That's kind of what it feels like. And so, okay, so we're in this AI era, and honestly, things get even weirder because we're not even comparing ourselves to celebrities anymore. We're not comparing ourselves to, like, hyped up fake influencers. We're comparing ourselves to people who don't even exist, like non-people. Right? Think about that. At least an actress or a celebrity singer artist is a real human. An influencer might be a real human. But when you look at AI, there's no genetics, there's no hormones, right? There's no bad angles, no bad lighting. It's so there's no postpartum fupa, there's no history, there's no humanity. It's just a caricature. But our brains start to process that as normal. And I think that's the part that concerns me the most about AI. Not that it's fake. Of course it's fake. We can spot that. We're all pretty good at being like, yeah, great, that's AI. It's the scary part is that our brains adapt to that. That's what brains do. That's the whole premise of rewiring, right? They're always recalibrating. So your brain's always asking, what should I expect? What's normal? What's enough? And as I've said a million times, your brain doesn't have a moral compass. It doesn't care if the input is healthy. It only cares what we repeat. That's why our alcohol tolerance develops, right? That's why any habit develops. The brain learns from exposure. So if we tie this back to beauty, and we're training ourselves to lose our tolerance for the ordinary human face, not just in the beauty world, but in everything. And nothing was more apparent to me than this feeling of, I guess, I'm not that bad. I'm not that different, weird, abnormal. I'm not behind in looks. Although people are, quote, looks maxing and douche maxing, maybe I am a little behind in that capacity because I'm just not keeping up with the Kardashians. But you see what I'm talking about here is people in real life, they change your perception of beauty, and it changes what your brain is accustomed to seeing and expecting, I guess. I looked at faces of all races, all nationalities, all ages. And when I got home each day back in my hotel room and I looked at myself, there was this softening toward the human that I am, the woman that I am, and I can look at my face a little bit more like, yeah, she's been around the block a time or two. You have laugh lines because of this. Your teeth are this way because of this. I'm full of stories. I'm full of history. I'm full of nuance. And the other thing about in real life, when you sort of experience yourself in real life, like socializing with other people, at least for me personally, I feel a lot more self-compassion because I can see people's reactions to me in real time, and we're usually laughing. And I might self-deprecate a little bit, but I've got charisma. I got a sense of humor, and that's going to come through way more than my looks. I imagine after hanging out with someone, a good hang, they're not going to go home and be like, Kate's a 7 out of 10. No, they're going to be like, she's funny, she's relevant, she's smart. They're going to notice the way that I make all these facial expressions and that I am basically an SNL skit walking. I always impersonate other people and I make ridiculously obnoxious gestures. But, there's a humanity to that. So if we circle the conversation back to AI, which I'm so sick of everyone's sick of talking about it. But I came across an article on Substack by writer Asai Chinendam. I think that's how you say it. And he was talking about AI writing, and which I think we're all using to some capacity to create in our lives, whether it be a script, an article. I use AI to help me put together the podcast. Now, I don't read it verbatim because that'd be fucking weird and it wouldn't even sound like me. right? But of course, we're all using various forms of technology to make things easier, faster, streamlined. So in this Substack article talking about writing, this creative process, he wrote, AI writing tends to manufacture emotions and intensify them artificially instead of letting them emerge naturally from the writing. And when I read that, I thought, oh my God, that's so true. That's exactly what happens with beauty too. AI is not really creating a beautiful image. It's just amplifying what we already know. And it's hyper beauty. It's hyper smooth skin and like cartoon eyes, and the waist is snatched. I just hit my microphone. And my mic is snatched. The waist is snatched up, right? And everything is like dramatic. So instead of you getting to process a face and look at it and discern and come to your own conclusion and feel your own intuition about it, AI is like, here, this is what you should think of this person. And social media comes in and does the same thing emotionally to a lot of stories that we should be formulating in our heads. It's like everything is dramatic, everything is devastating, life changing, everything is sped up, transformational, everything's a breakthrough, everything's a quick before and after. And it's easy to see how normal life that's slower, shittier, more nuanced, less sequential, it's boring. And there's so much more margin for error, I say in air quotes, in a human face than a machine created one. So the last thing I would want is to see normal emotions start feeling inadequate. Right? I normalize the shit out of everything my clients go through because we spend a lot of time in spaces online where it can be this sped up before and after reality. And there's not a lot of sitting in the nuance. And I think there's a danger to that. The danger is that real life stops feeling enough. And we forget that things in real life emerge slowly, right? Time takes time. Shoot me in the face. I know. Recovery happens slowly. Sure, I can show a before and after picture of me on social media. I could even AI church up my after photo to look like, wow, sober glow up. But what you wouldn't see are the years in between that and the gradual changes and the little things, the subtleties, right? How my confidence slowly reemerged, people's trust in me, my self-worth. I mean, you can kind of see it in my eyes in the photo. I'll post one on my YouTube if you're watching this online, but you just can't see the moments in between, how my marriage kind of slowly came back to life, right? Nothing really meaningful in my life arrived as it like this big eruption. It was like it slowly unfolded. It slowly revealed itself over time, maybe even deepened. And I have to wonder if we lose our appreciation for a slower unfolding because we're so conditioned to intensity. And, recovery taught me that there's this intense, dramatic, amplified version of me, albeit a fake moment with alcohol. But then there's also this like slower, deeper, quieter part of me. And that's the part that you don't see coming from photos. I'm moving into aesthetic surgery and the topic of all that. Now, I've worked for cosmetic surgeons throughout my nursing career. So I've had a lot of access to the behind the scenes of breast augmentations, liposuction, facelift. Who can say blepharoplasty? Dude, I had one done myself. I can't even say it. So and there is a real nip tuck element, if you've ever seen that show, to what we do to our faces. Again, this is the part you don't see on social media. There's been a real emotional journey here. It's not a very quick before and after. So much so that when I used to work with a certain cosmetic surgeon, he would do a facelift on a woman. We'd mummy wrap her face and wheel her out the back door so that the people in the lobby didn't have to see what they're going to become after their surgery, because it's so incredibly frightening, because we don't want people to see that part. And of course, in the before and afters, you don't see the 10 times that this woman had to come back to the surgeon for areas that maybe didn't pan out exactly how we planned. I remember one lady who developed a little bit of Bell's palsy. One side of her face was a little droopy afterward. We had to kind of like Botox some areas. There's there's a lot of deformities that can happen. I mean, it's not an exact science. We're working on the human body. And so there's an emotional component too, like your face is changing, and it's so crazy to have this identity and then go under surgery and come back and be like, "Oh my god," I remember once I got a chemical peel, my face looked like beef carpaccio. I think that's a Sex and the City line, but anyway, I was full on like Red Hot Chili Peppers, and it was hard for me to even look in the mirror. Or like we don't talk about the before and afters of like, you know, cold sores. Gross. I was reading a Substack article by Kat Sadler, and the whole thing was about post facelift. Nobody talks about the fact that your ears could be elongated and you're going to have to go to follow up, follow up, follow up, right? It's not a quick before and after. It's like there's all these follow ups in between where maybe the facelift didn't turn out exactly like you planned, and or there's going to be nuances in the healing and in the recovery. And she was really honest about this in her Substack. I really appreciated that it's not as simple as turning the page and here I am. And I think that's also true when we're talking about before and afters when it comes to alcohol. Maybe the part no one's talking about is that alcohol is that your face was super puffy while you were drinking. And when that puff goes away, you might be a saggy jowled person. Like I'm a thinner person. And so when all the bloating from alcohol went away and my face thinned down to what it was from not living on a sugar bottle every night, my face was really saggy. Now, I would not go back to the bloat and the dead skin and the dull eyes and the half dead appearance, but that was something that nobody prepared me for. I guess what I'm trying to get at is just we never really see the full picture of things, even though we live so informed, so online, so up to date. There's so much nuance in between we don't see. And I really actually started thinking about the alcohol marketing and how they've been doing this for decades as well. I mean, think about every alcohol commercial you've ever seen, right? They are pros at making sure we see the good. No one's bloated. No one's shitting their pants. No one's anxious waking up with anxiety at 3 a.m. and like existential dread. Not in an alcohol commercial. You're not getting a DUI fighting with your partner, right? Everyone's hot, tan, thin, perfect teeth, or maybe they're on a yacht, all fabricated, much like a lot of what we see. And even though we know that's fake, like our brain knows when we see an alcohol commercial, okay, that's not real life. That's not going to happen. Our brain responds to repetition emotionally, not just rationally. And so we don't automatically think we're just being sold products anymore. We're sort of like being sold an alternate reality, and one where nobody ages, where we don't struggle, where we don't get DUIs and shit our pants, and where everyone's beautiful and successful and thin all the time. And the longer the exposure to big alcohol marketing, the easier it becomes to look at our actual life and conclude like it's wrong or it's boring. It just really, really hit me, staring at women in their 60s and 70s in Central Park, or, the 52-year-old woman at the vintage shop who sold me that scarf. Like it really hit me that that's reality. Nothing about our actual reality is optimized or filtered or AI generated. It's so human. And isn't it becoming more radical to just be honest and human? So how do we do this is the question, right? How do we keep going without self-sabotaging and hating ourselves? And I've tried to think of like a pithy list of perfect ways to navigate all of this, but there is none. And I'd be Pollyanna bullshitting you if I said, get off social media. I mean, yes, if you can take a break from social media, that's awesome. I don't. I'm not even going to lie. I look at various feeds every single day. First thing I do in the morning is check my email. I am not some healed, perfect version over here. But what I can say is get out there and see people in real life. Have exposure to real faces. Go do things in person to where you can capture the nuance of humaning and experience yourself experiencing others, right? Follow older women on social media instead of the young influencers that make you feel like shit about yourselves. Like, I'm not trying to follow Amelia Gray. I follow her mom, Lisa Rinna, because I want a woman closer to my age and follow a writer, a comedian, someone doing interesting things. Follow women with real gray hair, with real wrinkles. And like I said, spend time looking at real humans when you're in a coffee shop, when you're at a bookstore or the mall or whatever. I feel like going to New York sort of recalibrated my brain. It reminded me of what 47 years old actually looks like, or what 70 actually looks like, what real life, right? And not all this crap that I had been staring at on my phone for months and months. I couldn't help but think, like, when I actually go out and live my life, I stopped spending so much time observing myself and observing my life, staring at myself too much. Am I saying this right, that right? And I'm more like in the happiest moments of my life when I forget what I look like, if I forget to check my appearance. Sometimes my funnest moments on this podcast are when I forget to worry about whether my smile's all jacked or I'm laughing really hard, right? And I think that comes through with what I'm talking about. If I was staring, I don't even look at my own image when I'm recording myself. I'm not trying to see that I got jacked up split ends and nose hairs poking out. I'm not trying to make myself feel worse. I don't want to check my angles or analyze my forehead pores. I want to get busy living. And so I guess this brought up a lot of thoughts for me, especially after this trip and realizing that I'm so conditioned to see perfection and expect that to be reality. And maybe that has lent to my personal obsession with wanting to get Botox and fillers and fix my lips, fix this, and this rabbit hole that I've gone down. I personally have had my eyelids done. I had to have a blepharoplasty because I have really hooded eyes. And this was a bit of a genetic thing, but they were like literally drooping down over my vision. But once I fixed that, I noticed the next thing. Oh, I got jowls. Oh, my nose is bigger than I thought. Oh, my teeth are probably not white enough. And once I fix that, I fix that, I fix that, right? And then at some point you just stop yourself and you're like, wow, it's never going to end. And although I have not seen the movie Talks, nobody has, it hasn't come out yet. I think that's where the character is going. It's this endless treadmill of fixing and fixing. And when we see very quick before and afters on social, but we don't see all the in-between horse shit, you know? And we have to point out the very real fact, this has been studied and researched, that AI has been trained to be gender and race biased. It's very westernized to include white features, and it's gender biased. It's going to show images mostly of men when it comes to STEM, business, tech. It's going to come at you from a man's point of view. They've actually studied that women are a lot more skeptical of AI because we're more emotive and intuitive. We think and make decisions with our gut, whereas men are a bit more transactional. And so the AI that we have now, ChatGPT, Claude, that may not be designed for a woman's psychology. And so we might be reading input knowledge gathered and assembled based off of GQ magazine. And the other thing I just wanted to mention that really helps me when I start to go down these rabbit holes is to create before I consume. And that was something photographer Chase Jarvis instilled into me when I was really reading a lot of his work, and I read his book and following his teachings. He's a sports photographer, and he always says create before consume. In other words, work on your creation and your own ideas before you flood your brain with other people's ideas and what good is supposed to look like. And for me, when I wake up in the morning, I want to create something to write or something to talk to you guys about. Creating this podcast is really helpful for me because I spend more time creating about what I think, what I feel, what I want to say, putting my work out into the world, and less time consuming other people, other people's content. So it doesn't shape it does. I mean, I'd be lying if I said it didn't shape other people's content, didn't shape the perception I have of myself. But when I spend a lot of time in creation mode, I really dig deep as to what do I think? And one of the things that we touch upon in the next episode on Talks is how creating something peels back layers upon itself. When I started this podcast, I had ideas about what I thought you wanted to hear, based on what other people's podcasts were like. A lot of stories about before and after. A lot of, you know, this is how I got sober and this is how my life was changed. Maybe even some shock factor. And I didn't want that. I didn't really know what I wanted. And so the more that I consumed other people's podcasts and tried to people please, the more murky and weird my podcast got, until I had to stop and sink down and journal for a while and think about, and even like, kill me for being cheesy, but like mood board a little bit of what kind of show do I want to put together, not based on what I think other people want to hear. Now, this is not going to be the most popular podcast in the world, right? I'm not Call Her Daddy, but I feel good about what I'm creating, in the sense that it's not someone else's idea. All that being said, and there's so much more about getting sober in the before and afters than people don't tell you. I mean, that we talk about on social media. It's not just a glow up. I mean, there's a massive glow up, don't get me wrong, but there's also other weird areas that you might not be prepared for, like me, like my face leaning way out. I felt like my age caught up to me overnight. Maybe it was taking away the filter of booze, and then I realized, oh wow, I look like shit. Emotionally, I was not ready to quickly be faced with my appearance like that. Like, I had been numbing and hiding and checked out for so long that when I finally got sober, I had to stop myself from doing such a deep inventory of my looks. And I talk about this in the next episode, and I think a lot of women can relate to this. I got sober and looked at my face, and I blamed myself for how shitty I looked. And that's part of what started me down a rabbit hole of plastic surgeries. It was this feeling of guilt. Like, I have wrinkles because I smoked cigarettes. My face is dull and gray because I drank too much. My teeth are rotten because of bulimia. I did this to myself. I did this to myself. It's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault. And so then I felt the need to fix it. And I remember writing about this a long time ago, how I come out of a medi spa and I look in the mirror and all I see is the guilt and shame of the woman who's done this to herself. And now I've got to hustle and get the Botox and get the fillers and fix, fix, fix. And that's not something that we talk about in the before and afters of sober Instagram, but that shit's real. And I'm here to have these conversations if y'all are ready for it, because a lot of things psychologically go on. And I don't think any of this happens with men. I mean, it might a little bit about the balding and the fat bellies and stuff, but we're at this time in our lives when, like, we're not supposed to age. Like, Demi Moore, 65, she looks 25. Okay. Well, I got sober at 38. I look 68, and so it's just all this guilt of like, I fucked up my own face, therefore I've got to fix it. And what a weird, weird time that we're in. And just pausing to have a conversation about this and get a little bit of insight about this, because here's the thing. We know this stuff, right? We are smart women. We know all this. I'm not telling you anything you didn't know. But maybe I'm reminding you that subconsciously you're forming these thoughts and opinions based on what you're consuming on content and, AI, and you're subconsciously beating yourself up a little bit, feeling a little guilty, feeling less than. You don't quite know why after scrolling for a while you feel a little glum. I mean, intellectually, well, of course that's not real. She's an influencer, or that's filtered. Intellectually, you know that. But subconsciously, you might not realize that a little bit of self-disappointment, doom and gloom, that second look in the mirror, that's what it's doing to you. So to pause and to talk about this stuff, have insight around it, especially with other women. Oh my God. I think that can be really incredibly helpful. Okay. I think that we've said enough here, folks. I'm waving my cunt fan in the air to fan my sweaty face. I am so glad you're with me on this journey. Send me an email about anything else you'd like for me to talk about, because I'm ready to go for it. Okay, thanks.